Hey guys, welcome back. This is part 4 of AP reviews. I covered the Renaissance. We also talking about the Renaissance. I'm going to start with the Renaissance and then we'll get into the Age of Exploration. The Age of Exploration is a very important one you need to know, but this is a continuation from part 3. We're also talking about the Renaissance being in Italy primarily because of the location. You want to know humanities. Humanism is a major influence of Florence, Italy, with the Medicis, one of the major painting families. There's a new artistic style. The artistic style that's along with humanism is this 3D perspective, right? This one-point perspective, that gives a 3D impression. The 3D impression is basically through art, through geometry and shadowing. So it gives a perception that it has more depth, and it's like a 3D version, like you think of movies today. That's different from the High Middle Ages, which is a very flat background, very 2D-ish. And this is a revival of that ancient kind of Roman and Greek philosophy and artistic styles, meaning the idea of making it look as realistic as possible. And it's through this new one-point perspective that has your eyes focus on one point and gives you depth through geometry and shadowing to make the picture look like it has depth to it, meaning that there's something different there. This is the Last Supper, and this is the School of Athens. Those are the most famous ones you would need to know with this idea. The Renaissance also implies the idea of architectural changes. The one you want to know here is Brunelleschi's dome, right? The idea of Brunelleschi's dome is one of the most famous ones. It's modeled after the Pantheon, which is an ancient Greek dome, so it's not the one that Brunelleschi does. But basically, it's important to know because that's the new type of artistic style. You probably won't get that, but in case you do, just to know maybe art and architecture and stuff like that. Anything about the humanities, and some of the biggest ones you need to know for AP World, because they kind of brush through it, would be Da Vinci. He has the Mona Lisa and Last Supper. Michelangelo has the Marble David and the Sistine Chapel, the painting on the ceiling, the Sistine Chapel. And Machiavelli would be the idea of how Renaissance affects politics and Machiavellian politics. And The Prince are some of the most famous ones. He's basically talking about the good and evil needed by rulers to maintain their power. It's very unlikely you get this for your AP World History test. This would be more of an AP Euro, but just in case you kind of know what Machiavelli is, here this is a good one to know because this basically facilitates the idea of new inventions, creates the facilitation of ideas flowing out of Italy going to the Northern Renaissance. One of the ones you do need to know is Gutenberg's printing press. Johann Gutenberg creates the first copy and paste of actual writing. He does this by actually rearranging prints, right? The idea to like get metal letters and kind of rearranges them in one way, and then puts ink on them, and then presses as a printing press, right? This makes writing and sharing of knowledge so much more faster because before this, everything was copied by hand in monasteries by monks. Imagine copying the Bible word for word, how long that would take you. Now you can rearrange these letters, right? These metal letters here, put ink on top, press down on paper, and now to make a copy would be almost instantly compared to writing it by hand. This is important because what this does is books start going from thousands to millions of books circulating. Books also are cheaper because the supply and demand of it, the supply is so much more. This also makes it facilitating for more people in Europe and the rest of the world to read, and it's more affordable. Not only think about this, it's not that people were illiterate before, is that if there's only like one Bible out there, in your area, and the church had it, and it was in Latin, you couldn't even afford to have the Bible, let alone afford to read the Bible. But now printing is basically out there. People are able to read. People are able to interpret things for themselves, and the knowledge of the Renaissance just sparks all over Europe and the world. People now, writing is basically, it's like the advent of the computer at this time, comparable to that time. Now, the Northern Renaissance, if you get into it, it's just oil-based paintings. The subject matter changes. The Renaissance itself is more religious and patrons of the actual arts, very famous people. As the Renaissance starts to go up north in northern Italy, sorry, I keep doing my hand here. Let's go back to here. This is where it starts, but as it goes up to northern Europe, it's referred to as the Northern Renaissance. And the two things you want to know about that is that Gutenberg is basically one of the people that's kind of influential with the creation of it in 1455. Gutenberg basically creates this. It helps facilitate the Northern Renaissance as knowledge spreads because you can't go to to Florence every time you want to go see something, right, or read something. But now the knowledge of Florence is circulating throughout Europe, and that's also the idea. You can see a differences of painting subject matter, that not only is the words going throughout the rest of the world, but the art, the subject matter is changing. It's going to be everyday people, townspeople, rather than just religious figures in Italy that they would have done, or patrons of the art in Italy. Now it's like everyday people, and it's also a little bit more darker because they use oil-based painting. You wouldn't really get those kind of questions, but in case you do, you can have some stuff to talk about, or outside resources, or whatever. The Gutenberg would be the one you want to know. Albert Durr does this idea of metal etchings on metal, to basically with acid, and what this does is the first copy and paste of words from Gutenberg. This is like the first sharing of images, right, like Instagram or something like that, because basically you can make an image on a metal plate, make a copy of it, and then it circulates everywhere, right? So these are the first of the first, so you can imagine how important they are for the sharing of knowledge and history. Now, what ended up happening is the Northern Renaissance was important because they started to translate a lot of the stuff in Latin into everyday vernacular language, and that facilitated that anybody can pick up a Bible, anyone can pick up some work and interpret it and read it on their own. You don't have to speak Latin now to read something that was written 500 years ago, right? You might need a little bit of translation, but you can read it in your own words and you can understand it going forward. The Dutch priest Erasmus, he wants to do the first copy of the Bible, not in Latin, but basically in everyday vernacular, which facilitates the idea of language being, religion being interpreted by individuals, and that's what leads us into the Protestant Reformation going forward. You have Sir Thomas More wanting to create a new society in his work, The Utopia. This is also an idea of the Renaissance. So the Renaissance influences art, architecture, science, politics with Machiavelli, society with Sir Thomas More, technology with Gutenberg and Durr, and that's basically the Renaissance of being reborn and how it facilitates and influences our lives today. His work is basically trying to create a perfect society on Earth, and that's where you get the idea of utopian society today. Here, the WAP concept now would be the idea of the Age of Exploration. The Age of Exploration starts off with the Portuguese Prince Henry the Navigator. This is a very, very, very important section for your AP world. This you will see somewhere on your AP exam. I'm pretty much guaranteed, like 95 to maybe 98% guarantee that you're going to see this. If they don't see it, then I don't know. But because basically this is the first time that the world is called world history, like the whole world can collide. Prince Henry the Navigator started to explore his area. This is basically facilitated off the 1400s later on to see what's around their actual coast of Portugal. Under Prince Henry, Portuguese converted Africans who were mostly Islam into Christianity. He wanted to link to Africa because he believed there's a great wealth of resources, and he wanted an easier way to Asia. So the whole premise of this is basically for religious expansion, for the wealth that's in Africa, and to cut out the middlemen. Now that's why it's important, because the Portuguese are the first to start the Age of Exploration. Prince Henry the Navigator starts to hire cartographers, which are like map makers. He has scientist people that basically gather evidence around the coast of Portugal, and as they're gathering evidence, they're starting to map out the world. As you're exploring different areas, you're starting to write down of your maps and ideas, and that's starting to facilitate more travel and more trade, like creating the first Google Maps, I like to say. Map makers, they wanted a way to explore the west coast of Africa, and they're really looking for a route around to India, because let me see if I have a better map here. This one here. They're really just trying to cut out the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire, those middlemen, those middle Islamic empires. They think that if they get a direct route to India, which is true, they would make more money by doing this process in business called cutting out the middlemen. Now that's important to know because basically that is a business 101 tactic, and they don't realize how big Africa is, but there's every time they go around, they're trying to thinking that maybe it cuts off here, they get a quick route here, they can avoid this, straight off connection, no paying a middleman for goods and services, you get more money. But as they're doing this too, the cartographers are mapping out every little nook and cranny of the west coast of Africa. That's an important geography section that you need to know for your WAP exam. I have a WAP review, you need to check that out. Like, subscribe if you like this video, the little quick little things that I do. I know it's kind of crazy. You could also read all this little information that help build up your knowledge of it if you maybe need a refresher or something. So the first guy after Prince Henry that explores Portugal, the coast of Portugal, Then you get this guy Diaz coming in, the next guy before Gama, and Bartholomew Diaz finds the Cape of Good Hope. Prince Henry Navigator navigates around here. Diaz kind of gets all the way down here. He finally finds this cape, meaning a land inlet with water, and he says this is the Cape of Good Hope because now there's hope to get to India. Now Gama just breaks through completely. So you have Prince Henry Navigator looking for a route, kind of finding around. You have Diaz finally getting to the south, the tip of South Africa, and then basically you have Gama coming in and busting through, getting the first direct connection to India. Right, the spice. This is the Indian Ocean trade too that you're thinking of. That it's one of those water-based empires. Think about the Portuguese; they're just basically sailing the whole time, and they set up ports here as they go along. The Portuguese, by finding this route to India, become super wealthy, and the rest of Europe starts to catch on, and now the rest of the world, Europe is starting to awaken that there's a whole world out there to explore. Now, this is a word that they use in the Americas called Armenians. If you don't know it, it's only in AP World History you would know it. Armenians are the American Indians that are basically in the Americas that they don't know really about that are existing, but they're existing at this point and flourishing. Now, the Portuguese are getting very, very wealthy, and now the Spanish have a problem. They're not as wealthy, and their next door neighbor, Portugal, is becoming super wealthy. This Italian named Christopher Columbus comes around, and he's like, I think I got an idea to make a lot of money and get a direct route to India. What if, he proposes, instead of sailing all around huge Africa, which now they know exists, what if we do this shortcut and go across the Atlantic Ocean? We would be basically pop over on the other side of India, and it would be shorter than going all around the continent of Africa. And now the whole thing going forward from this part was, the whole saying that, well, if you sail, you could sail off the world and stuff. That's not necessarily true. Most educated people at the time in educated world, like you guys, AP Whoppers, right? You guys, they kind of knew the world was curved, so they knew there's a curvature to it. You can think about it even right now. Like you could stand on the coastline, you can't have a telescope and see, another continent because it curves. So they knew it was curved, and they knew this philosophy, this idea would be good. The problem is they don't know how big the Earth is, like an Atlantic Ocean and the Americas in the way, and then the Pacific Ocean. So he didn't know that, but he knew it was curved. And he goes to the Portuguese first. They say, look, we got a good deal. We have this already spice trades going in India. We don't need this shortcut. He then goes to Spain. In Spain, Isabel and Ferdinand, they did that Reconquista, but economically, remember kicking out the Muslims and Jews, financially, it wasn't really a good move. So they're more willing to gamble on this Italian guy saying, take these 3 boats, try your luck out, who knows what's going to happen. And that's the story where he crosses the Atlantic Ocean trying to find India, but ends up finding the New World, the Americas. He lands somewhere in the Bahamas first, and then what ends up happening is, after time, they all realize that basically this is a new world. Ferdinand and Isabella appeal to Spanish-born Pope Alexander to claim their new world, basically because this is a new territory. And now the Portuguese and Spain are kind of like rivaling into this area. So the Pope does this line of demarcation to say, look, you guys split up this new area. You guys explore this area, you guys explore this area, and leave it hands off. That's also why today you can think of this section of South America. This is Brazil, where they speak Portuguese, the east side, and in the rest of South America they speak Spanish, the west side. Now it doesn't look like a very fair line trade because they gave this section to Portugal and this section to Spain, but also they don't realize how ginormous North America is and South America. So they both agreed to this line, and it's called the treaty is called the Treaty of Tordesillas, and this basically agrees to this line of demarcation that the Pope does to settle any disputes for finding and kind of colonizing this new world. Amerigo Vespucci was basically wrote a journal on his kind of findings and his travel to the New World, and a German cartographer, mapmaker, saw his journal entries, used them to make a map of the Americas, and named it Americo, right, or Amerigo's notes, or America, and that's where we get our name today, the Americas. Now, the Portuguese and the Spanish are settled in the southern portion of South America, or the southern part. But you still have people wanting to explore and find this new route to India that they feel like, okay, the Americas are there. But if we cross the Americas, we can still get to India. And that's when the French, Dutch, and English get involved and they try to find the Northwest Passage. They believe that if, let me go back in here. They believe that if they go over North America Northwest Passage, they can find a new route to pop on the other side in India, right? They can go around this way and pop out over here. It's possible, but it's not really feasible going forward that way. But it ends up being important because you got to think about, well, what is this today? It's modern day Canada. What languages they speak? They speak English, they speak French, right? And here you think of the colonies of America later on, North America, and that's the English. So it's something that leads to people colonizing and influencing these places for centuries and even till today. Magellan then tries to find another route to India, and Magellan's important because he says, I'm not going to try to find a northwest route. Magellan says, I'm going to try to go around the tip of South America. Now this is important because as he's trying to find this route, he's basically mapping out the coastline of South America, and he finally does reach this actual little tip here of the Americas. Let me go back to this one, this is good. He finally reaches the tip of South America, and then he's like, he hits the Pacific Ocean. He names it Pacific or peaceful because it's Latin for peaceful, meaning the Atlantic Ocean was a lot rougher. And then he's like, guys, we're almost there. Like, I bet if we just take a trip now, he convinces his crew, like, let's just go for it. We're right there. Like, India's like right around the corner, 2 weeks. It ends up not knowing how big the Pacific Ocean is. Somewhere in the Philippines, it says that there was a mutiny and he didn't make it. But the important thing is that his crew does make it, and they're the first to circumnavigate the world. So Magellan's crew makes it. He doesn't make it. The whole story of him, what happens to him is kind of sketchy, but the idea is that they're the first people to fully go around the world, noted in the world and recorded. And that's important because now the world is basically understood of circled. It's been circled by humanity. It's important because it's a milestone in human history to say, I've been around the world, right? And it's something we can't even say theoretically in one shot kind of thing. Now as the world is found out, these empires slowly start to expand their connections all around the world. So the age of exploration is exploring, but it's also colonizing after the exploration of claiming these different territories. The Portuguese slowly started to carry out a strategy of buying goods directly, and this is when they would kind of set up these trading posts here. And it's important because they would say, hey, go to India, buy it when it's low, hold on to it in these ports, and then I'm going to come around with a boat and then pick it up and then sell it to the Europeans and make a lot of money. And remember, this is about the spice trades. Spices at this time are luxury good. Salt, spices, they're worth their weight in gold. They're a luxury good because you can only get them. They're not like table salt and table pepper today. So that's the idea of why it's so important to get these new trade routes along with other things. They create these. They basically bust open these African empires that were once there, Mombasa and Malindi. These East African empires, and they're the ones that basically kind of like they break them down. And if you can kind of see it in the world here, over here, to create this new trading empire in the Indian Ocean. This here you would get a question like the Portuguese being the first ones to really start this age of expansion and going forward. And it's important because the Indian Ocean trade or the water-based empire would be the Portuguese and how they became very affluent by having this direct connection to India and the profit that was going from them having this direct connection. As the age of exploration is growing, you have the increase, unfortunately, of slaves. Now, slaves were basically something that had been around for thousands of years, but the age of exploration is the first time where slaves are purposely captured for profit. Before, it was more like, oh, we had a war, the losing side would lose, they would basically become your slaves, and then that was it. But it wasn't like someone proactively went to go find and make people slaves. And that all changes with the age of exploration and then the triangular trade. Okay? The triangular trade consists of Europe trading with Africa for slaves, which are free labor because basically you buy a slave and then they're basically your worker for life. So this is basically the idea of the forced migration of millions of people against their will for profit. All right, this has basically never happened again it's never happened in history, and hopefully never happens again in history. The idea is that the Europeans would bring in manufactured goods here, trade them for slaves, bring those slaves to the Americas for workers on plantations. The first plantations they utilized were sugar. That's an important one for WAP. Sugar were the first plantations for slaves, and that's where you see the increase of slaves and this forced migration of people into this new area. Okay, this went on for 300 years, meaning millions and tens of millions of people were brought against their will. There were people in Africa, such as Alfonso I, who were basically, he was converted by missionaries to be educated, but he saw what was happening to his continent. These people basically being taken against their will, brought over to the New World, and basically he actually tried to fight it, even though the greed of humanity outdid the ideas of what ethics were and morality of treating other people. Okay, so the greed of humanity shows its face by grabbing these people and selling them for profit for the expansion of your wealth. Now, to understand this also, there weren't only Europeans being involved in this. African continents or African kingdoms grew out of the slave trade. The people on the coast, one of them which you want to need to know for your AP world, is the Asante Kingdom, and it occupied present-day Ghana. In the 1600s, Osei Tutu won control of the trading empire Kumasi, and he created the Asante Kingdom. This is the one of the kingdoms of later on Ghana you need to know for your WAP exam. To help unify his kingdom against strong neighboring kingdoms, he claimed his right rule came from heaven, the mandate of heaven, divine right of kings. The Africans used it too for their kingdom, and linked him to spiritual bonds. Under Tutu, government officials were chosen by merit, monopolies on gold mine, and slave trades. So this is actually one of the African empires that emerges and is profitable by slave trade, and it's ruled by Africans. Okay, so it's not just Europeans being involved in the slave trade, it's African kingdoms taking over and taking advantage of other African tribes and cultures and kingdoms to become this strong Asante Kingdom, which is funneled by the greed of the Europeans coming in, and the idea is that the Europeans are trading them for slaves with manufactured weapons such as guns, which is giving them power over the other people in their in Africa, which are tribes using bows and arrows and stuff like that. So that's the kind of whole dynamic that's going along with this idea. Again, the triangular trade is the facilitating of all these connections going forward. You have Europe having manufactured goods bringing into the west coast of Africa. The west coast of Africa, Ghana, and the places like the Asante Kingdom are bringing slaves from the interior of Africa to the coast to be held in pens to be traded with the Europeans for manufactured goods. They're being brought against their will in something called the Middle Passage, the most arduous time of travel for the slaves, even though if you fought against them in the tribe, you'd be killed. You're sold against your will. You're brought on the ship, pack you in like sardines, and hoping maybe 50 or 60% of them survive, meaning people that you can't even survive the way over to the Americas. Then you get to the Americas, and then you're sold into bondage for the rest of your life, and that's just hard life that would kill you too. So it just gets from bad to worse as this whole thing's going, and the degradation of this whole continent by the greed of slavery and the greed of making profit for all people that were involved. The triangular trade shaped a series of Atlantic routes. So they bring over slaves over here. They trade those slaves for raw goods such as sugar and other things, molasses, and then later on tobacco and cotton, and then they bring them back to Europe. Europe is becoming very, very wealthy, and this goes on forever. During this time frame, you have slaves being forcibly migrated by tens of millions into the Americas, and that's the first time ever that people are brought from one area of the world to another against their will. Like, there wouldn't be any other reason to do that other than profit and greed. Again, this is the triangular trade network. This is one of those things that you need to know for AP World. I can't stress it enough. And this is basically triangular trade network. Now, that's where I'm going to leave it off now, because we'll talk about, we'll finish it off with the Columbian Exchange. As Spain basically continues to grow as a kingdom, they actually encompass places like the Philippines, right? Philip II, the king, they name it after them. The spirit of the Catholic Reformation, they start to convert the Filipino people to Christianity, and they start to spread it in the Philippines. This is basically the Southeast Asia part, the Philippine area, with Spanish involvement in the age of exploration going in there. They would ship silver mined in Mexico, also in Peru, across to the Pacific to the Philippines, and then that would be facilitated to the Europe. And that silver actually went into later on China, and that's important, that facilitation of wealth going across and being taken away from the empires of the Mayans, the Peru, the Incas, and so forth in the Americas. So you start seeing that the people here are forcefully kept against their will. If you're, this is along with the Africans, if you're someone that was a Taino or someone that was native to the land, the Europeans would come in, the Spanish, they would come in, they would force you against your will, they would make you work in mines, usually to death, and then they will go into another town, take over those people, and work them to death. On top of that, the Europeans brought something that really just killed off the civilizations, which were their diseases. Okay? So one thing that you can say with the Columbian exchange, meaning this is after Christopher Columbus, is that one thing that the Europeans brought over were their germs. The Europeans had an advantage over the natives, even though that they were outnumbered with guns, new weapons, germs. They're spreading disease even though they didn't plan on doing that. It's something that happened, wiping out populations, giving them an advantage. Gums, germs, and steel. They actually had metal armor that gave them an edge over the local people, the Armenians. So this is one of those things that you see, how can one group of people in the hundreds take over another group of people in the thousands, and those are the things that gave them the advantage. And the Columbian exchange also explains the idea of new ideas such as new crops such as potatoes and corn being brought back to Europe to be grown. So there's a difference between the triangular trade network, where the physical goods are moving from one area to another, and then the Columbian exchange is one thing they love to bring up in the AP world is diseases bringing over to the New World, and how that caused a lot of population degradation. So the Columbian exchange is not the physical goods just being traded once. It's like in the Americas, that's where you found potatoes. Now Europeans brought the potatoes back to Europe, and they're growing those potatoes in Europe. All right, so they're no longer, they trade a little bit, but now it's creating a new good for people to eat, and the populations in Europe, the diet of the Europeans is changing, and that's the Columbian exchange. So it's intertwined in that triangular trade, but it's basically, once the disease is brought over to the New World, you don't need to keep bringing in more disease, and now it spreads all over, right? Once you bring a potato to the Old World, Europe, you can start growing it there. You don't need to bring any more potatoes, because now they're growing their own types of potatoes. And that's the intersection of these two worlds kind of colliding, and things that were only found on one area are brought over to another, and vice versa. The Spanish bring in horses and so forth, oranges from China into the New World, new potatoes and corn back into the Old World, and this new kind of like blending of environments and goods and stuff happens, and that's referred to as the Columbian exchange. During this age, there were things called entrepreneurs, and the ideas of the economic system was mercantilism, which is basically, it starts to grow that the way your country becomes powerful is to get as much gold and silver hoarded into your coffers, your piggy bank, as possible. So that would be, maybe mercantilist would be something that they would kind of bring up. And the ideas of tariffs are like taxes on trade of people coming in. So this new commercial revolution, commerce, trade, facilitation, mercantilism, merchants, new entrepreneurs are taking off, creating new businesses, and this is basically the economic principles going for at this period of time. Again, Armenians, AR meaning conquistador, slide, disease, smallpox. So that's the end of this review. Hopefully you liked it. Like, subscribe, jazz hands, and yeah, have a good one, guys. Bye.